you to do is just put your feet together and arms at your sides just like this, and keep your head still, and just stay in this position until I tell you to stop. Okay?
I have balance issues, FYI, just so you know.
Okay.
In late July of 2023, a police officer responded to the scene of a serious car accident in Crystal Lake, Illinois, where a motorist had collided with another vehicle after she was seen driving erratically. Upon arriving at the scene, officers were met by a seemingly disoriented young woman who looked like she was dressed for a night out on the town. Later identified as 28-year-old Jessica Krochmal, she was fortunate enough to walk away from the crash uninjured, while a 20-year-old female passenger who was riding in the other vehicle suffered serious injuries. Krochmal agreed to undergo a field sobriety test, but before it even began, she warned the officer administering the exercise that she had balance issues. By then, the cop had noticed signs of possible intoxication, including a strong odor of alcohol on Krochmal's breath. Perhaps not surprisingly, Krochmal struggled to maintain her balance during the walk and turn portion of the exercise. In body cam footage, she could be heard telling the officer, "I really don't have good balance issues." She also stopped in the middle of the test to ask the officer if she was doing okay. The cop told Krochmal to continue with the test and took her into custody on suspicion of aggravated driving under the influence causing great bodily harm. At the time, Krochmal was out on bond for allegedly knifing someone's car a few months earlier. After learning that she was being taken to jail, she gave the arresting officer a spiel about how she has a high alcohol tolerance. She claimed that she was mentally present, despite the fact that she had just gotten into a serious car wreck. Krochmal seemed shocked to learn that she was being locked into a cell while the police finished up the booking process. She was visibly upset by this, and at no point throughout the police body cam video could she be heard expressing any concern for the accident victims. In July of 2024, a new mugshot of the young woman appeared online, but the nature of her most recent arrest and the outcome of her previous cases are unclear. Number 19. Safira Allen.
How y'all gonna inconvenience me? I get on the plane and y'all tell me I gotta get off? No, today I'm not, and I'll make sure it's recorded.
Lauren Phillips was working as a boarding agent for Spirit Airlines at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport in May 2018 when a woman ran past the gate, down the ramp and onto the plane without properly checking in. Later identified as Safira Allen, she plopped down into a seat that was reserved for another passenger. Phillips tried removing Allen from the plane, but she allegedly refused to exit the aircraft and began broadcasting the interaction on Facebook Live. She went on a bizarre tirade which didn't make much sense, but she appeared to have a problem with the name of the airline. In the video, Allen could be heard saying, "You'll need to change your name because nothing Holy Spirit about this airline." She continued to yell at crew members and passengers throughout the 20-minute video, and she accused airline employees of causing her to miss an earlier flight by closing the gate early. At one point, she could be heard saying, "I'm not getting off. You're going to have to call the people." Several minutes later, a crew member ordered everyone off the plane to redo the boarding process. Passengers could be heard moaning and groaning with disappointment over the delay, and many people did not hesitate to direct their frustrations at Allen for causing the unnecessary holdup. One person could be heard lamenting, "Are you kidding me?" while another said, "Congratulations, you're the donkey of the day." Allen continued to raise her voice as she shouted back at the frustrated passengers, shouting, "If I can't go to Las Vegas, neither can y'all." She told several people that they were going to hell and gestured toward the exit while saying, "Hell is that way," and made some disturbingly insensitive comments toward a group of Asian passengers after everyone else had cleared out of the aircraft. Allen headed toward the cockpit and volunteered to drive the plane while a crew member blocked her from going any further. Everyone left the aircraft voluntarily except Allen, who finally grabbed her bag and deplaned after police officers came on board, prepared to remove her by force if necessary. She continued streaming the incident on Facebook Live as she reluctantly followed the officer's orders to get off the plane. Allen was charged with criminal trespass, simple battery, and obstruction of a law enforcement officer, and she apparently came to her senses shortly after the incident, based on a Facebook post apologizing for her behavior. Number 18. Drunk detainee clashes with cop. The American reality series Jail offered a first-hand look into the booking process at a Las Vegas jail, where a camera crew filmed the interactions between newly arrived criminal suspects and the staff members who operated the facility. During one episode, an obviously intoxicated woman copped an annoying-sounding tone when Officer Nicole Citre asked her if a garment she was wearing beneath her jeans was a pair of shorts or underwear. The suspect answered the question in a seemingly exasperated tone, prompting Officer Citre to ask the woman why she was yelling. In response, the detainee asked Citre why she was being handcuffed, to which Citre replied, "Because that's my job." The officer went on to tell the woman that she should be thankful because she at least got to wear the more comfortable handcuffs out of the two types that were available for use. In response, the noticeably disoriented woman said she didn't know why she was at the jail and that she didn't even have a driver's license. Citre explained that a driver's license is not required for someone to land in jail. The suspect had been picked up by police in connection with multiple accidents involving a stolen car. Her arrest came following a brief standoff with law enforcement and a struggle with officers as she resisted being taken into custody. Citre later approached the woman while she was seated in a waiting area and asked her why she was so angry. This only caused her to become even more enraged as she started yelling about how she thought everyone was staring at her. She yelled at Citre to let her go, adding, "I have not did." Needless to say, this strategy failed to get the woman out of jail, and she was booked into custody on several charges, including grand larceny and possession of a stolen vehicle. Number 17. Leonardo Spatola. During Sheboygan, Wisconsin's annual Brat Days Festival in August of 2016, someone alerted police who were patrolling the event to a fight in one of the tents. Officers found one of the two suspected brawlers lying on the ground. The other man, later identified as 24-year-old Leonardo Spatola, had ran over to the other side of the tent. Witnesses told the cops that Spatola had repeatedly struck the other man, who was an older gentleman, to the point of nearly knocking him unconscious. Police tried to help the injured man, who was bleeding from a facial wound and had a loose tooth, but he refused to discuss the incident and declined medical treatment. When officers approached Spatola, he reportedly charged at one of the cops, who grabbed him by the waist. He proceeded to elbow the officer in the eye and continued to resist as multiple officers wrestled him to the ground. After finally subduing Spatola and finding 3.5 grams of cocaine in his pocket, the cops placed him in the back of a police van. Due to the stifling hot weather that day, the police left the vehicle's door open while waiting for EMTs to come and evaluate Spatola. The officers became distracted while treating the cops Spatola had elbowed, and the suspect made another run for it, barefoot and with his hands cuffed behind his back. A brief foot chase ensued before Spatola ran into a chain-link fence and fell to the ground, giving the officers an opportunity to apprehend him. Spatola was charged with multiple felonies, including battery to a police officer, bail jumping, escape, and second offense cocaine possession. He pleaded no contest to several of the charges and was sentenced to several years of prison time, followed by probation. In 2018, Spatola's probation was revoked due to a violation. Records show that he's currently incarcerated with a projected release date of February 2026. Number 16. Adrian Dickey. In July of 2023, Republican Iowa Senator Adrian Dickey was accused of refusing to obey a police officer's orders during an annual bike ride across the state called RAGBRAI. According to the sergeant who arrested the politician, Dickey refused to get out of the road at the sergeant's request while passing through with a large group of cyclists. Dickey was booked into the Sac County Jail on one count of interfering with official acts. In a statement to the Des Moines Register, he claimed that he was absolutely innocent of the charge and refused to answer any more questions, directing reporters to his attorney. 3 months later, prosecutors dropped the case, citing a lack of enough evidence to prove Dickey's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After clearing his name, Dickey claimed that he was walking his bike along the road while attempting to reach a trail. He denied being part of the large group of cyclists who blocked the road and thanked the Sac County District Attorney for clearing up the matter. Number 15. Kabeer Gbaja-Biamila. Green Bay Packers Hall of Famer Kabeer Gbaja-Biamila was in the process of divorcing from his estranged wife, Eileen, in 2020 when he refused to sign a court document which would give Eileen access to the former couple's bank accounts. He had previously agreed to sign the document, but was now arguing that he was a sovereign citizen and was therefore exempt from following the law, stating, "I have my own laws which are superior." Up until that point, the judge, Donald Zoodmulder, had been extremely patient toward Gbaja-Biamila, who reportedly droned incessantly during the hearing about his religious beliefs and being a sovereign citizen. After realizing the situation was going nowhere, Zoodmulder held Gbaja-Biamila in contempt and sentenced him to 6 months in jail for refusing to sign the document, as 10 deputies surrounded him and tried persuading him to comply with the judge's order. The former football player only became more uncooperative. Gbaja-Biamila resisted as the deputies fought to handcuff him and repeatedly stated that he did not consent to the judge's order. Law enforcement was eventually left with no other choice but to tase the disruptive divorcee, who was charged with resisting arrest. By that point, the judge had left the courtroom. Gbaja-Biamila eventually agreed to sign the document, at which point the judge returned to the courtroom and dropped the contempt charge, but the resisting arrest charge remained in place and Gbaja-Biamila was taken to jail. Number 14. Jose Bellido-Rosado. Shortly before 10:30 a.m. one morning in July of 2024, police in Waterbury, Connecticut, responded to a call from the owner of a stolen vehicle. The caller had reported the vehicle missing a short while earlier and had located it in a local parking lot with a man inside. She confronted the alleged thief, 44-year-old Jose Bellido-Rosado, who exited the car and began walking away. The woman pointed Bellido-Rosado out to responding officers who stopped the suspect. As the police tried to handcuff him, he resisted and became combative. During the struggle that ensued, Bellido-Rosado bit one of the cops and repeatedly tried to grab an officer's gun out of its holster. In body cam footage of the incident, the officer could be heard yelling at Bellido-Rosado to stop reaching for his gun at least 6 times. By the time the police subdued the suspect, 2 officers and the suspect had sustained minor injuries. They were all treated at a local hospital, and Bellido-Rosado was later arrested on charges of theft of a motor vehicle, interfering with an officer, possession of drug paraphernalia, and 2 counts of assaulting a police officer. He remains in custody amid the ongoing case. Number 13. Vaping Straphanger lashes out. In June of 2024, footage of a woman throwing a tantrum at a New York City subway stop went viral after first appearing on Instagram. The video showed the woman screaming at police officers and refusing to hand over her ID at their request, claiming that she didn't have an ID as she clutched a $2,000 designer purse. It appeared as though the officers were trying to have a rational conversation with the woman, whose behavior only continued to escalate as she got in a cop's face and called him a rude name. According to news reports, the incident began when the suspect was caught vaping on the subway platform, which is strictly forbidden. Instead of simply cooperating with law enforcement, she lashed out. At one point, the woman could be seen stomping and slamming her fists as she continued to yell and call the police names. After concluding that the difficult woman probably wasn't going to start cooperating, officers handcuffed her and took her into custody. She could be heard asking the police why they were arresting her in an obviously shocked tone, as if she didn't realize that this is usually what happens when a person refuses to comply with law enforcement. The footage went viral, but drew mixed reactions from viewers. Many people admonished the woman for her behavior, while others accused the cops of unfairly targeting her when there are often worse things going on throughout the Big Apple subway system. Number 12. Jason Stoll. 47-year-old Jason Edward Stoll was selling hot dogs along a street in St. Petersburg, Florida, on a Saturday night during the summer of 2022 when a police officer came by and told him that his permit had expired. The officer told Stoll to close up shop, but instead Stoll whipped a hot dog at the cop. He was subsequently arrested on suspicion of felony battery on a law enforcement officer and resisting an officer without violence. If convicted as charged, Stoll could have faced up to 3 years in prison. Less than a month after his arrest, however, prosecutors declined to pursue the case, noting that the facts and circumstances do not warrant prosecution at this time. Stoll landed back in police custody in February 2024 when he was arrested on suspicion of misdemeanor domestic battery. He was accused of repeatedly striking his wife in the face in their vehicle. Police arrested Stoll, who was charged with an additional criminal mischief charge that same day for banging his head and body against the window of a police SUV, causing damage to the vehicle. Prosecutors declined to pursue the domestic violence battery charge, and in August, Stoll pleaded no contest to the criminal mischief charge. The judge withheld adjudication and ordered Stoll to pay around $500 in fines and court costs within a year. Number 11. Bernard Tomic. During the early morning hours one day in July of 2015, employees and police officers asked the 22-year-old Australian tennis player to turn down his music at a hotel in Miami Beach after receiving complaints from other residents. Tomic had come to the hotel after being eliminated from Australia's Davis Cup quarter-final squad amid strained relations with Tennis Australia. The organisation had snubbed its nose at Tomic following his poor performance in the Hall of Fame Championships match in Newport, Rhode Island, describing the event as the Hall of Shame and later apologising for the remark. Meanwhile, Tomic felt that Tennis Australia had abandoned him after he underwent hip surgery the previous year. Given the nature of these recent events, it seems as though Tomic may not have been in a good mood to begin with the night police came to his hotel room. Instead of complying with repeated requests to tone down the noise, Tomic reportedly pointed his finger at the police in an aggressive manner. When he failed to turn his music down, the cops asked him to leave the hotel, but he refused to leave his room. But Tomic couldn't hide from law enforcement forever, and he was eventually taken into custody on charges of trespassing and resisting an officer without violence. Tomic's temper landed him in the news again nearly a decade later in 2024 when he got into an argument with his girlfriend, Keely Hanna, while playing tennis and quit in the middle of a match. By then, the beleaguered athlete had fallen from being the world's 17th best tennis player to number 247 on the list. He had performed poorly throughout the match while suffering from suspected COVID symptoms, and the argument between him and Hanna only made an already uncomfortable situation even more awkward. Number 10. Sean Jordan. In November 2024, civilians in Southlake, Texas alerted police to a gold van that was driving the wrong way and hitting other cars. Officers arrived at the scene as one of the van's occupants, 19-year-old Sean Jordan, chased another man on foot while armed with a rifle. Jordan fired the rifle with the bullet, narrowly missing a pursuing officer. The officer shot back, then hid behind a truck and radioed to his co-workers that shots had been fired. It took multiple officers to subdue Jordan, who was extremely combative toward law enforcement. After being placed in the back of a police cruiser, Jordan took his seatbelt off and kicked the door. He also reportedly tried to kick and bite police officers as they fought to get him under control. During the ride down to the Tarrant County Jail, an officer sat in the back seat and held Jordan's arms to prevent him from removing his seatbelt again. After arriving at the jail, Jordan attacked the cops again, resulting in the decision to strap him into a restraint chair for the safety of everyone involved. He continued to kick and bite, and paramedics ended up giving him a sedative in order to calm him down. Jordan was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated assault of a peace officer, and resisting arrest. He remains in custody amid the ongoing case. Number 9. Crystal Edwards. In May of 2016, 27-year-old Crystal Edwards went to the police headquarters in Minden, Louisiana, to answer some questions about a car accident she had been involved in the day prior. A police spokesperson would later tell the Minden Press-Herald that Edwards was already in a bad mood when she arrived at the station and that she continued to get loud during her conversation with law enforcement. At some point during the disagreement, Edwards walked outside, where police claim she deliberately dropped her pants to her ankles, exposing her underwear. The incident was reportedly witnessed by an officer who followed Edwards outside to ask her about her foul attitude, and when he noticed that the woman's underpants were showing, he arrested her for violating the city's sagging pants ordinance. Edwards was also charged with public intimidation for allegedly threatening to sue the officer who arrested her. While running her name, the police discovered that she had a warrant for her arrest for criminal damage. Edwards was detained on the warrant and transferred to another facility to sort out her outstanding case. Number 8. Skylar Chiffon Pollard. In July of 2022, 29-year-old Skylar Chiffon Pollard ran late for a flight she was planning to catch at Miami International Airport. By the time she arrived at the airport, it was too late to board the aircraft, but Pollard ignored protocol and got on the plane. She refused to disembark when employees told her to exit the plane, so they called the police. Even after officers responded to the scene, Pollard reportedly continued refusing to leave the aircraft. As a result of her stubbornness, the rest of the passengers had to get off the plane so that police could remove Pollard and arrest her. Pollard was charged with disorderly conduct and violating the designated operational area of an airport. Records show that she was later identified as a fugitive out of Georgia, and it appears as though she was extradited to the neighboring state to deal with her legal problems there. Number 7. Sandra Doorley. In April 2024, an upstate New York prosecutor landed in the news for being extremely rude and verbally abusive toward a police officer who attempted to pull her over in Webster for speeding. Body cam footage showed the officer pulling up to the residence of Monroe County District Attorney Sandra Doorley right after Doorley had parked in her garage. Later identified as Cameron Crisafulli, the officer asked Doorley why she didn't pull over for him when he activated his lights and siren. Doorley admitted to going 55 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone and claimed that she didn't realize that Crisafulli was trying to pull her over because there were other drivers on the road at the time. Crisafulli said, "I was right behind you," and instructed Doorley to stay in front of her garage, but she was uncooperative and at one point even tried going inside her house. The officer could be heard repeatedly telling Doorley not to go inside and that she couldn't just walk away from a traffic stop. Doorley retorted that she knew the law better than Crisafulli and told him to get the you-know-what off her property. She then bragged repeatedly about being the district attorney and said, "I don't care," when Crisafulli told her that she had been speeding. At one point, Doorley threatened to call the police chief, prompting Crisafulli to call a supervisor to the scene. The situation finally calmed down after the officer's supervisor spoke with Doorley, who apologized as Crisafulli handed her a speeding ticket. After body cam footage of the incident was released to the public, Doorley apologized for her behavior. 3 months later, the Monroe County Board of Ethics ruled that she had abused her position to receive special privileges, but an outside prosecutor ultimately declined to pursue charges against Doorley, stating that it's not a crime to be rude. Number 6. Max Kennedy and Caroline Summer Rose Kennedy. Caroline Summer Rose Kennedy is the granddaughter of slain U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. In August 2017, when she was 23 years old, she was arrested at a raging house party near the family's compound in Hyannisport, Massachusetts. Cops later said that both Caroline and her father, 52-year-old Max Kennedy, appeared to be intoxicated when officers arrived at the residence at 1 in the morning in response to a noise complaint. According to a police report, Max rambled incoherently, poked an officer's chest with his finger, flung himself at a wall and smashed a cabinet full of glass collectibles. Officers observed several signs of intoxication, including bloodshot, glassy eyes, and Max was sweating profusely. He was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police cruiser, and Caroline proceeded to throw herself at the vehicle. Max and Caroline were also accused of inciting an angry mob of partygoers, and Caroline refused to take a breathalyzer test but admitted to being drunk. The father-daughter duo were charged with disorderly conduct and released from custody with a court date. In November of that year, Caroline was entered into a pre-trial diversion program, which gave her the opportunity to avoid a criminal conviction as long as she complied with certain rules and conditions set forth by the court. Max was fined $150 for the noise violation, and the disorderly conduct charge against him was dropped. Number 5. Cary Drew Portner. Broward County, Florida resident Cary Drew Portner had his first major run-in with the law in the late 1990s when he was arrested for stalking his ex-girlfriend after she broke up with him for cheating on her. He was accused of repeatedly following and harassing the victim, vandalizing her car, and stealing tens of thousands of dollars of savings that the woman had accumulated during the relationship. The victim had obtained a restraining order against Portner, but it didn't stop him from continuing to lurk near her home and workplace. He was also suspected of burglarizing his ex-girlfriend's car and running her off the road while following her late at night. The woman's car ended up in a field where she sat terrified as Portner drove past and stared her down. She went to the police and Portner was arrested the following day on an aggravated stalking charge. In late 2000, Portner was found guilty by a jury and sentenced to a little over 21 months in prison. He was released in January of 2002. In July of 2019, nearly 20 years after the stalking incident, 51-year-old Portner was arrested in Key West following a violent altercation with a gym employee. The incident began when a police officer responded to a call from the gym worker, who reported that a man had nearly struck her with his car after a disagreement inside the business. She claimed that Portner had gotten angry when she asked to see his ID before running his credit card. According to an arrest affidavit, Portner asked the woman why she needed his ID, and she explained that it was the gym's policy. He allegedly used several racist and misogynistic slurs toward the employee before storming off. The victim followed Portner outside in order to snap a photo of his license plate so she could file a police report. She told police that Portner stepped on the gas when he saw her taking the picture and that she barely avoided being hit by his car. The suspect reportedly circled the parking lot a few more times while yelling more obscenities, then left the scene. A witness corroborated the victim's version of events, telling law enforcement that the woman had to jump out of the way in order to avoid being struck by Portner's vehicle. A short while later, officers located Portner, who admitted arguing with the victim but denied trying to hit her with his car. He was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon without the intent to kill, but the case was later dropped due to insufficient evidence. Number 4. Entitled woman can't believe she's under arrest while working a routine patrol shift during the summer of 2024. A police officer somewhere in the United States tried to pull over a female driver who proceeded to enter a parking lot. The woman parked her vehicle and began walking away from it, prompting the officer to yell at her to get back in the car. She continued trying to walk away, telling the cop that she didn't know what his problem was. Just minutes later, the woman began hyperventilating and saying that she felt threatened by the officer. She continued refusing to get back in her car while frantically yelling to someone to call 911, saying she didn't recognize the man who was talking to her. The officer's efforts to have a rational conversation failed miserably as the suspect became increasingly melodramatic. She accused the cop of attacking her, even though it was clear based on the officer's body cam footage that he hadn't even touched the suspect. The woman kept saying that she didn't know what the officer's problem was and to leave her alone, while once again accusing him of attacking her and telling him to call his supervisor. She even went so far as to imply that the cop had grabbed his gun in a threatening manner. Despite how difficult the woman was being, the officer continued trying to have a calm and civilized conversation with her. But she wouldn't calm down, and she also did not appear to be paying attention when the officer tried explaining why he pulled her over. The suspect's demeanor went from seemingly panicked to aggressive as the conversation continued. She continued refusing to hand over her ID even after multiple other officers responded to the scene and was shocked when they arrested her. Even as she was being handcuffed, the suspect remained in denial about the reality of the situation, stating that she wasn't under arrest and didn't approve of what the cops were doing. It's unclear why she was so hesitant to cooperate, but she continued being difficult at the police station, where officers had to forcibly remove her from the transport vehicle and carry her inside. Instead of being let off with a warning or a traffic ticket, she was charged with multiple crimes, including resisting arrest. Number 3. COVID mask Karen. A so-called Karen forced a plane to land during an American Airlines flight from Ohio to North Carolina in July of 2020 because she refused to wear a COVID mask. The incident occurred just a few months into the pandemic when numbers were still high and a lot of people were dying from the virus. The defiant traveler reportedly claimed that she couldn't wear a mask due to a medical condition, but rules are rules, and the airline's staff was unwilling to make an exception. When the woman made it clear that she wasn't going to cooperate, the pilot made the decision to kick her off the flight. Passengers could be heard clapping and cheering in celebration in footage of the Karen gathering her luggage and disembarking from the aircraft. She responded to the applause by saying, "You can clap all you want," as she left the plane. Passenger Jordan Slade, who captured viral TikTok footage of the ordeal, later told the Daily Mail that the ousted passenger became argumentative before she even boarded the plane. The unnamed woman reportedly demanded to board first, causing a scene in the process. After boarding, she continued talking on her cell phone even after a cabin crew member told her to end her call, leading to an argument between the two. Then, after noticing that the woman wasn't wearing a COVID mask, a passenger confronted her, The back-and-forth bickering that ensued between the unruly passenger, staff members, and fellow travelers took so much time that the flight crew had to return to the airport to refuel before getting off the ground. Slade's video garnered an outpouring of enraged reactions from social media users, with some commenters wondering why the disruptive woman was allowed to board the aircraft without a mask in the first place. Other social media users remarked about how the woman seemed to think that the rules everyone else had to follow didn't apply to her. While news reports made no mention of an arrest, the woman at least had the inconvenience of having to arrange alternative travel plans, which could have been avoided if she had just put a mask on. Today's topic was requested by JWC247. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Inebriated Florida woman smashes mailboxes. In January of 2024, Florida Highway Patrol Trooper Jason Slaughter responded to the scene of an accident in Santa Rosa County, where a woman had struck 2 mailboxes with her Mercedes-Benz. The driver, named Christine, refused to exit the vehicle despite Slaughter's repeated commands to do so, leaving officers with no choice but to forcibly remove her from the car. Christine remained uncooperative after being removed from the car. She refused to have a conversation with law enforcement but insisted on speaking to her husband. When asked about her alcohol consumption that day, Christine denied being intoxicated, but she refused to undergo a field sobriety test or provide a breath or blood sample. And Slaughter noticed signs that Christine had been drinking, including an odor of alcohol. Inside Christine's car, he found a mug that smelled like wine. Based on the circumstances, Slaughter decided to arrest Christine on suspicion of DUI, damage to property or person, and resisting an officer without violence. She was detained overnight at the Santa Rosa County Jail and posted a $1,000 bond the next morning. Stick around after number 1 to watch our previous episode about when deputies go wrong. Surprisingly, those supposed role models are not always on their best behavior either. Number 1. James Lujan. In May of 2020, police in Española, New Mexico arrested Rio Arriba County Sheriff James Lujan for refusing to cooperate with a warrant to search his electronic devices for evidence of interfering with criminal investigations. Lujan was suspected of helping his friend and former Española City Councilor Phil Chacon hide from law enforcement following a police chase in 2017. Afterward, he told a deputy to withhold information regarding Chacon's whereabouts from other members of law enforcement. In a separate incident, Lujan was accused of showing up drunk at a crime scene involving Chacon and refusing to leave despite being in no condition to be there. When police came to collect Lujan's devices, Lujan accused the cops of harassing him. He also refused to relinquish an iPhone that he had been seen using in past crime scene footage. Following Lujan's arrest, his defense attorney released a statement describing the search warrant as incorrect and possibly invalid. The case nevertheless moved forward, and in late 2021, Lujan was found guilty of aiding a felon and intimidating a witness. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and resigned from his position as sheriff before serving his time. In early 2022, Lujan pleaded guilty to an additional misdemeanor charge of resisting, evading, or obstructing an officer. He received a 1-year jail sentence, which was ordered to run concurrently with his 3-year term. Number 7. Janelle Garrick. In December of 2019, a sheriff's deputy from Jefferson County, Wisconsin, was charged with felony burglary. The charge against Janelle Garrick led to the prompt termination of her employment. Her criminal activity was said to have taken place from February of 2018 to June of the following year. While she was off duty, Garrick read the online obituaries of people who'd recently passed away and knew that the surviving family members would be attending their funerals. She then proceeded to burglarize their homes. If confronted, Garrick would claim that she was there to follow through on a Facebook Marketplace transaction and that she'd gotten the addresses mixed up. At one point, she'd actually left a note about said false transaction on the door of a home she'd targeted. The Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory subsequently found her fingerprints on it. In another incriminating incident, a family returned from a funeral early to find Garrick inside their residence. She claimed to have been hired through Facebook to clean the house and also mentioned that she worked for the sheriff's department, without specifying which one. The police believe she'd been involved in at least 7 such incidents, and she ultimately pleaded guilty to 2 counts of burglary and 1 count of attempted burglary. In January of 2021, she was sentenced to 2 years initial confinement, followed by 3 years of extended supervision. Number 6. Zachary Wester. In July of 2019, Jackson County Deputy Zachary Wester was arrested by the authorities in his native Florida on charges of planting drugs inside the cars of motorists during minor traffic stops. While conducting a search of their vehicles, Wester would covertly plant methamphetamine and other drugs. He turned off his camera at key moments and manipulated the recordings in such a way that his nefarious activity was concealed. He then made the arrest based on the fabricated findings. There were dozens of cases in which Wester's disturbing actions had led to people being wrongfully charged. Many were victimized by the deputy between 2017 and 2018. The consequences, as reflected by the case of a man named Benjamin Bolin, were dire. He'd been released from prison on a DUI conviction, and Florida's welfare agency had recently granted him custody of his daughter. Bolin was on his way to buy diapers when he was stopped by Wester, who planted methamphetamine in his car. As a result of the false arrest and ensuing charge, Bolin lost custody of his daughter. Teresa Odom, another of Wester's victims, would subsequently claim that he deprived her of the credibility she had as a mother and grandmother. Odom missed about 1.5 years of the time she could have spent with her grandbaby, as she powerlessly struggled to clear her name. The sheriff's office requested an investigation into Wester in 2018. A team of crime analysts and special agents put in over 1,400 working hours as they combed through extensive body cam and dash cam footage before a pattern emerged. Upon the deputy's arrest, officers searched his vehicle and found an unmarked evidence bag containing 42 pieces of drug paraphernalia, 10 baggies of meth, and 10 baggies of marijuana. He was booked on multiple charges of racketeering, official misconduct, fabricating evidence, and false imprisonment, 19 of which he would be found guilty. At 28-year-old Wester's trial, the prosecutor described his behavior as an egregious breach of public trust and also spoke about the responsibility that comes with the powers that authorities are granted. In July of 2021, Wester was sentenced to 12 years, 8 months, and 6 days in the Florida Department of Corrections. In the wake of his arrest and trial, prosecutors dropped charges in nearly 120 cases that occurred from 2016 to 2018. In doing so, once again underlining the extent of the damage caused by the deputy. Number 5. Victoria Ann Cheek. In February of 2021, Marlborough County Sheriff's Deputy Victoria Ann Cheek was taken to the Florence County Detention Center in South Carolina after being charged with DUI. Officers arrived to a bar in Florence shortly after 1 a.m. to reports of a fight and saw 28-year-old Cheek back up and crash into 2 parked vehicles. She didn't appear to have been involved in the confrontation. Officers approached her and she agreed to take several field sobriety tests. The detention center's records indicated that she was booked at around 3:20 a.m., a few hours after she'd plowed her vehicle into the cars. Cheek has since been released on a $1,000 bond, but official reports didn't mention how the incident would affect her job as a deputy. Number 4. Shauna Bishop. A California woman who'd previously worked as a deputy was sentenced to 1 year in prison in September of 2020 after pleading guilty to having unlawful relations with a minor. The charges stemmed from the events of April 2019. Bishop, a deputy for the Sacramento Sheriff's Department, had recently ended a relationship with a co-worker. The man, whose name wasn't released, told his ex-wife that he wasn't comfortable with the way Bishop, a woman in her mid-40s, was behaving around their son, aged 16. Nevertheless, the 2 women had become friends, and as an enforcer of the law, Bishop was asked to come and speak to the teenager about his drinking and marijuana use. She was even invited to spend the night at their home on April the 28th. That night, after the mother had fallen asleep, Bishop went to the teen's room and engaged in intercourse with him. The legal age for consent in California is 18. In the aftermath, the boy told his sister about the incident, and she spoke to her mother, who then alerted Folsom authorities. In May of 2019, the investigation began and Bishop was placed on administrative leave. She resigned shortly thereafter. Both Bishop and the boy's mother had taken Ambien before bed. In the ensuing trial, the former blamed her behavior on the sedative, usually used to treat insomnia. In addition to jail time, she'd be placed on 5 years probation and have to perform 180 hours of community service, as well as register as a sex offender. Number 3. Oscar Rodriguez. On January the 27th of 2014, Luis Carlos Morin Jr. was fatally shot outside his home in Coachella, California, by Riverside County Sheriff's Deputy Oscar Rodriguez. He'd gone to the residence to arrest Morin on outstanding felony warrants when an altercation reportedly occurred, resulting in Rodriguez having to use his service weapon. In 2015, he was officially cleared of any charges related to the shooting, as it was deemed his actions had been justified. Not long after that, a civil suit was launched by Morin's family against Riverside County. It came with a shocking revelation on a matter that had been overlooked by the initial investigation. The deputy and Diana Perez, a woman with whom Morin had 2 children, had been having an affair in the time period leading up to the shooting. Their last intimate encounter had occurred roughly 6 weeks before the victim was shot. The suit alleged that Perez had broken off the affair and that Rodriguez executed Morin out of jealous rage. The deputy resigned from the sheriff's office in 2016 as the love triangle revelation had prompted a murder investigation. Evidence suggested that on the night of the killing, Rodriguez had hid in the bushes near the victim's home and ambushed him as he returned from a family event. He kicked him in the back of the knee, pinned him to the ground, and fired a round into his back. Rodriguez didn't call for an ambulance until backup arrived at the scene. Text messages, phone records, and statements indicated that he'd been pressing Perez for months about Morin's whereabouts. She sent him a text message with a map indicating Morin's location on the night of the shooting. In the aftermath, Rodriguez was charged with murder and Perez with being an accessory, facing life in prison and up to 3 years, respectively, if found guilty. The civil lawsuit against Riverside was settled with Morin's family for nearly $7 million, which represented one of the most substantial payouts in the county's history. Today's topic was inspired by the Sneaker Guru 23, Cohen MC Gamer, and Kim Clark. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Richard Barrios. In April of 2020 in California, a Ventura County Sheriff's deputy was arrested and charged with destroying evidence as well as filing a false report in relation to an arrest he'd made a year prior. 27-year-old Richard Barrios of Camarillo had taken into custody a woman he'd suspected of being under the influence of an illegal substance. The incident occurred on November the 12th of 2019. Barrios asked the woman to provide a urine sample, which she did, and it came back negative afterwards. The deputy threw the sample away and also wrote in his report that she'd failed to provide it. He's yet to have offered a reason for his actions, which would have resulted in the incarceration of an innocent person. Fortunately, another deputy tested the woman a few hours later, and she was released. Richard Barrios was investigated on the basis of an internal complaint. His trial was delayed due to the pandemic. However, based on the charges leveled against him, Barrios risked a maximum sentence of 5 years and 8 months in a state prison. Number 1. Michelle Gilbert. Starting in 2011, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Deputy Michelle Gilbert became a central figure in a corruption investigation that led to multiple arrests within the department where he worked. The investigation was spearheaded by the FBI. Gilbert unwittingly accepted a bribe of $1,500 from an undercover agent to smuggle a cell phone to an inmate. Once he was within their custody, the FBI had planned to use him as a pawn in Operation Blue Line. The Bureau would have rented a warehouse and spread the word that it was housing copious amounts of drugs. Gilbert, secretly working as an informant for the Bureau, was meant to recruit other corrupt deputies to moonlight as guards. Once they were enrolled in the fictitious drug enterprise, the FBI would have used them to gain information about abuses in the county's jails. 2 days after it had been given the green light, Operation Blue Line came to a crashing halt as the Sheriff's Department discovered the phone and traced it back to the Bureau. What followed was a deliberate attempt by the department, its deputies, and commanding officer to frustrate the FBI's investigation in a desperate bid for self-preservation. At least 21 of them were subsequently convicted of obstruction of justice, including Sheriff Lee Backer, who eventually pled guilty to lying to federal authorities. Gilbert cut a deal with prosecutors in 2012 and agreed to cooperate with the FBI. In a series of interviews conducted in the years that followed, he revealed the horrific abuses that inmates had suffered at the hands of the county's deputies. He reported that they would sometimes squeeze inmates' fingers until they flinched, only to accuse them of starting an altercation and beat them. Cruelty was reportedly encouraged, as if one of the deputies treated an inmate humanely, the others would refer to him or her as Deputy Love and ostracize them. Gilbert himself partook in the violence on multiple occasions, accompanied by at least 5 others of the sheriff's employees. He would routinely brutalize inmates on the 3rd floor of the men's central jail. The deputies would then get their stories straight and falsify reports to cover up the beatings. Even if an inmate attempted to officially complain, their reports went nowhere, since they were also processed by the deputies. As part of his plea deal, Gilbert wasn't charged for using excessive force, but only bribery, for which in 2016 he was sentenced to 6 months in a federal prison. Thanks for watching. What's your biggest pet peeve when you're at the airport? Let us know in the comments below.